Well, you must be looking forward to another Australian trip.
Well, we sure are. I mean, I wouldn't be coming back so soon if we hadn't had just a really splendid time.
You are one of those artists that is forever on tour, aren't you?
Well, you know what? Until this voice finally craps out, I really do like the touring, and I feel as though I owe it to my voice, which is my biggest gift. It's not that easy to sing anymore, but I still like some of the sounds that are coming out, and yeah, I'm happy with it.
Yeah. Well, you released your first album in 1960. Now, that was before Dylan. I guess Elvis Presley was rivaling Frank Sinatra at the time. Was it like a musical Wild West back then?
That's an interesting way to put it. I guess, well, in a way, but folk music per se was kind of a modified Wild West because at least the way I entered it, for me, it was by way of the ballads, which are pretty sedate, For a couple of years, it was mainly British ballads, and then some livelier ones. But it wasn't until a couple of years were up that I got into topical songs, because you know what? Nobody was writing them.
Mm.
They hadn't been written until, I think, Tim Hardin was the first quote-unquote Greenwich Village songwriter that we knew about, and that was, I think, 1958.
1958, you're a 17-year-old girl and already protesting, Joan. I'm very proud of you.
Well, it came with the territory. I mean, my family was socially conscious and active and pacifist, and I was brought up in the Quaker religion. I'm not a Quaker, and I wasn't by birthright, but I did learn how to be quiet. I did learn the use of meditation, and it's where I became serious about nonviolence at a really early age.
Way back then, I mean, I guess it would have been impossible to foresee a time when a country like America could even take somebody like Donald Trump seriously.
When my mom tells me, because I don't remember, that when I was about 14, I'd been reading The Rise and Fall of the Roman Empire. And I came out to where she was ironing, and she says that I said, Mom, you know what? The same thing's going to happen to the United States as happened in the Roman Empire. So now I don't know whether to gloat or mourn, because I think we've already long since begun crumbling over here. Not to mention, the total refusal of dealing with global warming, which may be what gets us all anyway.
Well, it's quite interesting that you bring up the topic of global warming. How familiar are you with Australian politics and the current government that's that basically, in fact, in the Prime Minister's word, climate change is crap?
Yeah. It was sort of like whoever our Republican was who threw a snowball across the room in Congress to say, you call this global warming? Just kind of, I don't know what it is. I don't know if they really believed things that we think are crazy, or whether, I know there are a lot of intelligent conservatives who are in this terrible struggle with themselves because they know they'll lose their votes if they say they think global warming is real. They're still at that level, So it's hard to imagine that they are serious and that there isn't some ridiculous scam behind what they're saying, because what if you had a heat wave and it was in the 140s, wasn't it, a few years ago in Australia?
Yeah, in the middle of the country, yeah.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so I'm in the least affected part of the country, so everything and our whole property has completely changed. It's all drought resistant. We've had to move or give up plants that were flowering and beautiful, and we have the cactus, and and our water bill is down to a fifth of what it was last year. And I'm smart enough to know that in the larger scheme that means very, very little. And then I don't know if you remember this, but sometime in the late 60s there was this great cartoon of a man picketing the White House, and he's saying, "No more war." And some man comes up to him and says, "You're not going to change the world doing this." He said, "Oh, I know that. I'm just trying to keep the world from changing me." So at some point, that's valid.
Yeah. Well, do you feel a bit like you were setting out to change the world in the late 50s and right through the 60s? Do you feel a bit like that man now?
And certainly with the water, absolutely. I don't want, to be one of the people who exploits this earth one more time. And do I think it's going to affect policy at this level? No, I don't. But I think we have some kind of. I think we need to behave as decently as we can right now, because everything is tenuous. We are at a tipping point. What do we do with our time in the meantime? I mean, do we squander whatever resources we have, or we just try to be decent? And try to be decent on behalf of other people as well. And I think it doesn't. I can't remember who wrote this. I don't know if it's T.S. Eliot or whatever. It just says, for us, there's only the trying, and the rest is not our business.
Considering the political turmoil in the world today, are you as amazed as I am that there are so few political songwriters from today's generation?
Well, it is a question in my mind, and I think that one thing that's sort of a hard pill to swallow is that there was just an extraordinary burst of talent for 10 years, and we haven't repeated that. And I'm sure some of it came from the atmosphere around us, because we all reflect that. But at the same time, how often are you going to get a John Lennon, a Joni Mitchell, a Dylan, a Janis Joplin, a Chris Christopherson? They were massive talents, and we haven't had that. We have some. And the other thing is, I don't know how many good songs are being written somewhere and not heard. Because it's hardly, an opening at the Grammys for the best the best new song written by people who care.
What a great category that would be.
It's very small.
Maybe we should start the Joan Awards and do it ourselves. Yeah. As somebody then that was even before Bob Dylan, what was your earliest recollection of when Bob came along? Was he one of those artists you instantly heard and knew that there was something there?
Well, there was such a buzz already about it. There's this huge buzz, and I was, and I wanted to hear this guy, and I went to hear him, and I thought, well, the buzz is all true. I mean, he was a unique talent, and I knew that, and people knew that, whether they liked the sound of his voice or not. There wasn't really any denying that he was a cut above, and always will be, But then, then there was, it was like some kind of vaccine taking all over the place. I mean, Joni Mitchell came along. Her stuff is brilliant. Judy Collins was a part of it. Peter, Paul, and Mary brought it into the public eye, because they commercialized it. I was in the mix, more as an active, using this stuff more as artillery, the songs for me and my activism, and then the British invasion. And all this was, again, that amazing time period that people wish they'd been there. I mean, people long, whether they really know about it or not, it was just like this dream. Every kid, who's aware of anything wishes they'd been at Woodstock.
Absolutely.
There won't be another Woodstock. We have to create whatever there will be.
Tell me about your feeling on the day of Woodstock. Was it a special moment? Could you feel it in the air?
You can feel it in the air. I could feel it in the helicopter. I was with Janis Joplin and my manager, and we were flying over. We were the last flight that got in before the storm started, and we looked down, and it was like ants, just crawling over the terrain, carrying their babies. And you could tell. I mean, there's sometimes when you can tell it's going to be a, quote, historic time. And then during it, it was just, well, I've never been to anything like it before or after. It was a day, in a sense, where people were allowed to be nice to each other.
Wow.
Cops were allowed to be nice to each other because there wasn't anywhere to put anybody if you tried to arrest them, and the place was so inundated with drugs it wouldn't work anyway.
I was unaware you were in the chopper with Janis. What was the conversation in the chopper? Oh,
I always did this. I did this about 3 times with her. I'd say, we ought to talk sometime. You could come over and have a cup of tea. He'd say, tea. With her bottle and the paper bag in her hand. And I was just so square. I didn't drink. I didn't do drugs. I was just like this little something out of one of the ballads, you know. So I think she liked me, and she thought of me as just some kind of a weirdo.
You've always had this great understanding of other people's songs. You've always chosen extremely well. The night they drove Old Dixie down, for example, how was that presented to you?
Let me think. I think so. People send me stuff, or they knew I was looking for songs, or I heard it. It was maybe, oh, cool, you ought to hear this that the band wrote. Might have been that. And it wasn't, we didn't set out to try and cut a single. We were just in Nashville in the studios having a wonderful time, and called in the whole staff of the whole building, the secretaries and the janitors, to sing on the chorus. And something happened with that that produced a magnetic song.
You've influenced so many acts over the years, and I discovered that Pete Seeger was the person who influenced you. I guess great music is traditionally passed along through the ages, isn't it?
Well, this seems to be. I mean, that's the definition of folk music, that originally that it's never down, it's just passed on. Well, that's not. I mean, I wouldn't be that exclusive about it anymore. But yeah, I never learned to really read music that well. And most of what I do learn, I just hear from other people. Right now I'm just planning an album, so I'm listening to stuff that my manager sends in, my assistant sends in, and it's turning up a lot of Tom Waits. Brilliant, beautiful writing. Some things of Richard Thompson, some things by people I don't even know, and I just listen and see where it settles. We've started off with 4 or 5 songs that feel absolutely right, and we probably need 12. And then I'm working with T-Bone Burnett, so I'm lucky.
Yeah. Well, we have this resurgence of folk today, which is, I guess, called Americana, and artists like Robert Ellis and Justin Townes Earle are the new breed of the traditional folk songwriter. Are you familiar with acts like that? Well, I know Steve Earle, Justin's father. You've covered a lot of songs off. But what about Justin and people like Robert Ellis?
I haven't listened. I have on my little list. I got enamored of Rhiannon Giddens and of Mumford.
Okay.
And then I've been listening to some of the stuff that my granddaughter likes and trying to relate to it, like Sam Smith. This other world of music that I haven't dug in, and listened to serious folk for a while.
House of the Rising Sun was on your very first album. That's still popping up in the set list.
I sang it at the Cambridge Folk Festival, and they sang with it, and it was unbelievable. It was like a hallelujah chorus, singing House of the Rising Sun, and I realized it's probably the Animals version. So I tried to recreate that as we were singing, but it was amazing. Yeah, we do that. It's too good a song not to do.
It's amazing that album was 55 years ago, and this year was deemed culturally, historically significant by the Library of Congress, which must have been very proud for you.
Yeah, it was nice. Yeah.
The set list is almost like a history lesson, isn't it?
Well, I know that I'm history when I walk out on the stage. I know that it represents a lot of, to a lot of different ages. I mean, if I say, I'm going to sing an early song, for some people an early song is Diamonds and Rust. Not that many people know Silver Dagger, because that was 55 years ago. So, yeah, and it's all connected with history, and it has more meaning in some countries than others, like going to Latin America and singing again for the people I hadn't seen since under the dictatorship, Pinochet, and all the emotions that come up around that, and education for young people, who may be about to forget that whole thing, and also the young people who are in their own battles now. Usually they're economic and around education.
Well, thank you very much for joining us here.
Thank you.